Brooklyn trolley strike. This story was widely covered, and reading the article in full of labor actions taking place all over the city, one can see why the powerful felt so threatened in this moment, why they needed to demonize anarchists as though they were hurting people like capitalists. This was a time when capitalists were called such flatteringly in the press. Being a capitalist was not the default for any U.S. citizen yet. Saturday, January 26, 1895, The New York Times. Will take back no strikers. Atlantic Avenue officials say they can get enough new men. It was stated yesterday by the officials of the Atlantic Avenue Railroad Company that although a number of the striking employees had applied for reinstatement, none had been engaged and probably would not be. The company, it was said, can get enough new men to run its cars. Policemen fired 5 shots, arrested 2 wire cutters, 4 got away in a wagon. 6 motormen of Steinway, Long Island, went to the Bushwick Creek Bridge at Bedford Avenue, Brooklyn, and cut the feed wires of the crosstown line yesterday. Roundsman Bunce and policeman McGrath arrested 2 of the men, Alvin E. Lewis and Willis Russell, but not until after a struggle in which the policemen fired 5 shots. It is believed that one of the 4 men who escaped was shot. They got away in a wagon in which they had gone to the bridge. The 2 prisoners were committed to jail pending a hearing. About 200 feet of wire, which had been cut down, was taken to the station house. Mob at Richards Street. Quickly dispersed by Company A, 14th Regiment. 500 feet of wire were cut twice within a few hours yesterday morning on the crosstown line at Richards and Coffee Streets. The wires that remained intact were decorated with straw, tin cans, old shoes, and other debris, rendering the passage of a trolley car absolutely impossible. Several hundred persons, many of them armed with clubs and stones, gathered at Richards Street and the Erie Basin early in the morning and made threatening demonstrations. Captain Noble of the 14th Regiment ordered out Company A and the mob fled. When peace is restored, then, says President Lewis, night cars will be run. A reporter for the New York Times yesterday asked Mayor Sheeran when the trolley cars would be operated at night. He sent out the following reply: "You must ask that question of President Lewis." President Lewis said, "As soon as peace is restored. I think that will be within a few days." Wire cutting caused delay, but cars were run under guard during the afternoon. No cars were run on the 15th Street line of the Atlantic Avenue system until late yesterday afternoon, the wires having been cut at 9th and 7th Avenues. The damage done was so great that the company was unable to make repairs in time to operate cars during the forenoon. Cars were started yesterday for the first time on the 3rd Avenue and Hamilton Ferry line. The first car went out at 2:20 p.m., and other cars were run on 12 minutes headway until dark. As far as the Kiwanis Canal, the cars were guarded by the 23rd and 47th Regiments. From that point to the ferry and back, they were protected by the 14th Regiment. Father O'Hare took a hand, offered money to a motorman to quit a car. Not enough police. A Roman Catholic priest took a hand yesterday in the Brooklyn trolley strike. He was the Reverend Father O'Hare of St. Anthony's Church in Bedford Avenue. 6 crosstown cars were stopped late in the afternoon in Manhattan Avenue in front of a big clothing store. A howling crowd stood around and jeered at every effort of the linemen of the Brooklyn City Railroad to string up wires that had been brought to a droop by ropes and strength on the part of the strikers. Trouble at this point had not been expected because cars had gone through without interruption. Father O'Hare came out of his house as soon as there was a sign of trouble, and the police sent to the Greenpoint stables for assistance. Cars were stalled near the priest's house, and screaming mobs were hurling stones into them without the slightest interference. There were only 2 policemen on each car, and against a mob that began at 200 and was constantly increasing, They had not the slightest chance. A half-dozen cars were in line in a few seconds, and to them Father O'Hare advanced. Thomas Hill, a labor agitator in Greenpoint, went towards the cars too, and began to beg the motormen to desert their jobs. Out of 12 men, they won over 6. Father O'Hare was talking to a motorman when there was a shout down the street. Roundsman Daly of the 9th Precinct came rushing down the avenue with 4 men behind him. He ran into the crowd, and the people scattered right and left before the clubs. Father O'Hare was not disturbed, and at the end of the policeman's charge, he was standing close to a motorman on whose sentiments the gentleman known as Hill was trying to play. "Come off that car," cried Hill. "You can get anything you want from us. Just get off and you can get your money in the corner saloon." Some of the men left their cars, and as they were going away, the priest of St. Anthony's said, "I'll see that you are treated well, my man. What these men tell you is good. Do what they tell you. Don't take the bread out of their mouths." One man on the front of a car could not be induced by any offer to desert his post. "Come on, my man," said Father O'Hare to him. "I'll see that you are treated well. Don't be foolish. These men tell you what's right." The man still hesitated, and Father O'Hare shouted, "Here, I'll pay you if you come off that car." He waved a $10 bill. The motorman looked at the money, opened the gates, and walked away. He refused to take money from Father O'Hare or the strikers. "Hurrah for Father O'Hare!" yelled the crowd, and a great yell arose as he walked away. 17 cars were started on the crosstown line yesterday. About a dozen of them carried their glass 3 blocks from the stables. Stones and chunks of pig iron littered their floors when they got back from an attempt to run to Erie Basin, and several wounded men in charge of their platforms made hasty escapes and have not been heard from yet. About 300 feet of wire were cut out between the Manhattan Avenue stables and Bedford Avenue, and that settled for the day the attempt to run the line. Captain Rhodes said to a reporter for the New York Times after a mob had allowed the cars to be brought to the Franklin Street stables, "We haven't enough men here. Everybody has been drawn to other places. We can't put 2 men in each car because we haven't got them. The specials are no good. They get away at the first sign of trouble. Do we need the soldiers? No, but they could help us a lot." The last car on the crosstown line returned to the stables about 5 o'clock, and with it came a story of trouble. Just beyond Bedford Avenue, there came from houses and shops a shower of stones and pieces of iron. Every window in the car was broken. "It's worse today than it was yesterday," said Division Superintendent Cameron. "Our men are leaving us. They get scared at the first sign of trouble." A Sackett Street car attacked. Captain Gillen and his men removed the missiles, and order reigned. Car 185 of the Sackett Street line of the Atlantic Avenue system had reached the corner of Hicks Street shortly before 1 o'clock, when bricks were hurled from a neighboring roof. Those who threw the missiles aimed well, for the bricks struck the roof and sides of the car and smashed 2 of the windows. The motorman turned on more power and narrowly escaped crashing into a Hicks Street car. A soldier of the 14th Regiment jumped on the platform, turned off the current, and applied the brake in time to avoid a collision. A crowd assembled, and stones and bricks continued to be thrown from the housetops. Word was sent to police headquarters that a riot was imminent, and the reserves from the 3rd, 11th, and 15th precincts were ordered to the scene. Captain Gillen of the 14th and his men then ascended to the roof of the neighboring houses and removed all articles that might serve as missiles. Order having been restored, the cars were again put in motion, and no further trouble occurred during the day. It looked like a bomb, but it wouldn't explode or burn. A cartridge in Myrtle Avenue, what was supposed to be a dynamite bomb, was discovered on the down track of the Brooklyn Heights Railroad Company at Fulton Street and Hudson Avenue yesterday. It consists of a tar-covered section of 1.5-inch iron pipe, about 5.5 or 6 inches in length. Each end was closed with tar. From one end, a fuse protruded. The thing was taken to the Navy Yard, and a test was made by Gunner James Hayes, under the direction of Lieutenant Commander Hennis and Inspector of Ordnance Elmar. The fuse was lighted, but the bomb didn't explode. Then it was cast into a hot fire. It was allowed to remain there for 1 hour, but it didn't burn or go off. The investigators concluded that it didn't have much merit as an explosive, but will continue the investigation today. A cartridge on the track in front of 467 Myrtle Avenue was exploded in the morning. It caused some alarm, but did no damage. The Hicks Street shooting. Citizens petitioned the grand jury to make an investigation. The killing of Tinsmith Carney by the troops of the 13th Regiment on Wednesday will receive the attention of the Kings County grand jury. A number of people who live near where the shooting occurred called on District Attorney James W. Ridgway yesterday and submitted the following petition to the grand jury. The following named citizens, taxpayers, and businessmen of the city of Brooklyn do most respectfully call the attention of your honorable body to the disgraceful and murderous conduct of the military commanded by Major George Cochran in shooting at and wounding inoffensive men, women, and children during the march of said military through Hicks Street on Wednesday, January 23, 1895, and we do most strongly condemn the course pursued by Mayor Sheeran in permitting the streets of our city to be overrun by reckless militiamen, dozens of whom were either drunk or crazy, and who, without any cause whatever, shot at, in one instance, mortally wounding men, women, and children for no other reason than that of showing their faces at their windows or in being engaged in honest employment which prevented them from getting out of the reach of the uniformed ruffians the instant they were ordered to do so. The names contained below are those of decent and law-abiding citizens of the city of Brooklyn, and the truth of the statement contained therein will be sworn to by them, and if your honorable body will investigate the matter and call the undersigned, we are sure that that most cold-blooded of murderers, Major George Cochran, will receive his just deserts. The petition has 26 signatures. Mr. Ridgway assured the delegation that he would lay the petition before the grand jury when it reconvenes on next Monday. The coroner's inquest over Carney's body will be held next Thursday night. State arbitrators try again. President Slocum and Lewis called Major Sheeran today. Acting in obedience to a resolution of the legislature, the State Board of Mediation and Arbitration again visited Brooklyn yesterday and located itself at the Hotel St. George. President Slocum of the Coney Island and Brooklyn Company told the commissioners that he felt that compulsory arbitration would be contrary to the spirit of the Constitution. He said that he would submit a written statement of his views today. President Lewis of the Brooklyn Heights Company thought such a state of affairs as now exists in Brooklyn should be prevented by some sort of legislation. The present strike, he said, was caused by the demands of the railroad employees who wanted to take the place of the board of directors. He thought the present a bad time for the committee's inquiry. He declined to make a formal statement of his views so long as the strike continued. Mayor Sheeran will probably appear before the commissioners today. President Norton of the Atlantic Avenue Railroad and President Partridge of the Brooklyn City and Newtown Railroad and the Executive Committee of District Assembly 75 K of L will also be heard today. Shot at windows. Company B of the 7th didn't hit anybody, however. A number of strikers and their sympathizers assembled in Gates Avenue near Hamburg Avenue at 5 o'clock last evening. They threw rocks at passing cars, and 2 or 3 pistol shots were fired. Captain Nesbitt, commanding Company B of the 7th Regiment, found some difficulty in clearing the street. Before it was cleared, several shots had been fired by the guardsmen at open windows from which stones had been thrown. No one was injured. The experiment of withdrawing pickets from Myrtle Avenue between 1 and 4 p.m. was tried. A crowd gathered and it was necessary to replace the guards. Attacked in Butler Street. Strikers board cars and tamper with machinery. A trolley car in Butler Street was attacked and stoned last night by a mob at Nostrand Avenue. Every window in the car was broken. There were no passengers and no one was injured. The police dispersed the mob. The non-union motorman let go his trolley in the excitement, and the trolley pole tore down half a block of wire before it was stopped. President Norton of the Atlantic Avenue Railroad said yesterday that the strikers in some instances boarded cars in transit yesterday and seriously injured the machinery. Cartridges in his pocket. John Story, an ex-motorman of the Brooklyn Heights Railroad Company, was arrested yesterday while attempting, it is alleged, to break into the house of 57 Grand Street, Brooklyn, which was filled with non-union men employed by the railroad and waiting for orders. In Story's pockets were found what are supposed to be 3 dynamite cartridges. It is said that he intended to blow up the bridge across the canal at Kent Avenue. Not a time for visitors. Major Abrams of the 7th Regiment announces that while the men of the command are always desirous of seeing their friends, he must request that the friends refrain from visits until the conditions of visiting are made less complicated. The regiment, he says, has now no facilities for receiving callers, and on 1 or 2 occasions the presence of ladies has been an embarrassment and a hindrance to the proper execution of orders. Wire cutters active. Wire cutters were active last night in Upper Fulton Street in Brooklyn. 5 cars were stalled for 5 hours on that thoroughfare near Buffalo Avenue. The wires were repaired under cover of the militia. Shots fired from windows. In Metropolitan Avenue at Humboldt Street last night, a car of the Brooklyn, Queens County, and Suburban Railroad, operated by a non-union motorman, was attacked. Bricks and stones were thrown from the roofs of buildings, and several shots were fired from windows. A squad of reserves, after a free use of their clubs, cleared the street. Several arrests were made. A father and son were arrested in one house. 2 rewards offered. The Brooklyn, Queens County, and Suburban Railroad Company yesterday offered a reward of $500 to any person giving information leading to the arrest and conviction of any officer or member of any committee of any organization who has advised or directed, or who shall advise or direct, any person or persons to cut or otherwise injure any trolley wires or feed wires or any property of the company. The road has also offered a reward of $100 to any person giving information leading to the arrest and conviction of anyone cutting or injuring any of the trolley or feed wires or injuring property of the company. The Harper's weekly piece was bigger on images than text, with page after page showing glorifying images of those who put down the strike. Regiment 23, Regiment 47, Regiment 14, and Regiment 7. Saturday, February 2, 1895, Harper's Weekly. A Journal of Civilization. The strike in Brooklyn. The question what wages shall be paid by a particular employer and what hours of labor shall be exacted by him, however interesting it may be to the parties concerned and to their friends, and however important it may be as an evidence of existing social conditions, is one which public opinion is rarely the proper tribunal to decide. The only known and accepted way of determining it is by contract between employer and employed after such free barter as the interests and views of each may dictate. Whether or not the wages paid by the Brooklyn streetcar lines were inadequate, and whether or not their regulations were oppressive to the men, cannot be decided by rumor, by the resolutions of striking unions, nor by any evidence now before the public. These are proper questions for the state labor commissioners. If the companies have really treated their workmen unfairly, the necessary impairment of their own service which follows is a proper subject of inquiry by the courts. We have no means of knowing whether the charges made by some of their former carmen are true, and it is surprising that many journals and some city officers, with no better information than ours, express passionate opinions on the subject. All such questions may be held in reserve for the present, in view of the serious crisis involving the civil order of a great city, which has followed the strike, and which presents other issues vital to our national welfare and to the safety of civilization itself. The broad principles on which modern society is founded are deeply fixed in the minds and hearts of the American people. The protection and enforcement of all rights of persons and property, of liberty and education, of labor and of free speech depend on civil order, and the first element of good citizenship is the resolute purpose to preserve this at every sacrifice and to hold all possessions, even life itself, subject to the necessity of defending it. Without this purpose as a basis of character in the body of its members, no community is truly civilized. Without it in the individual citizen, the pretense of patriotism is but a cloak of the demagogue. The principle is so predominant in our national character that any avowed attack upon it is sure to be met by an indignant and overwhelming assertion of the will of the people that civil order must be maintained. But the dangerous foes of liberty and peaceful industry are not those who avow social disorder as their aim. It is only the mob which proclaims a moral purpose and professes to seek justice that threatens our society. It is when such a profession is plausible enough to divert the minds of men from the first duty of patriotism, the maintenance of civil order, and to weaken their indignation against all infringements upon it, that a mob is really dangerous. The greatest evil of lynch law does not lie in the risk of inflicting punishment on individuals who may be innocent. This is bad enough, but the poison of the practice works incalculably greater damage in gradually destroying the character and conscience of the community and teaching it to substitute irregular private vengeance for the orderly justice of organized society, that is, to recur to barbarism. Now the Brooklyn strike has been but the application of an enormous scale of lynch law to punish the supposed offenses of corporations. If it should succeed, it would invite working men everywhere to coerce employers to their demands by disorder and violence. From the first, the managers of the strike have acted as the enemies of the nation and of mankind. That is to say, the principles they have assumed and the methods they have adopted are such as cannot be reconciled with the existence of an orderly and civilized people. They had abandoned work, proclaiming that they were essential to the public service of the companies, and their places could not be filled, so that they must be recalled on their own terms. But they did not wait for facts to decide the issue they had challenged. They immediately organized various forms of illegal interference with the efforts of their former employers to find help. They resorted to intimidation, to assaults, to the destruction of property on a large scale, to reckless disorder for the purpose of terrorizing the patrons of the railroads. In all this, the mass of the men were far less to blame than the demagogues who encouraged them, advised them, and led them on, without the excuse of ignorance or the pressure of want. Among these demagogues were found members of the bar, who taught as law theories too absurd for discussion, and public officers who openly declared their belief that the success of the strikers was more important than the peace of the city. For a time, no doubt, public opinion was confused by the irrelevant talk of such men as these, and attention was diverted from the real issue. But we have not yet reached such a stage of demoralization in any of our great communities that the principles of lynch law can be made acceptable to the people by any disguise. The real sympathies of Brooklyn, of the country, and of the whole civilized world are necessarily and earnestly enlisted in favor of the order of society and against all who assail it. When its enemies lay down their arms at discretion and submit all their claims and rights to the decision of the peaceful methods by which every orderly community must decide them, it will be time to consider what these claims and rights really are. Till then, civilization is at war with them and has no choice but to put them down.